Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Double Sleeved. I'm joined here by my co-host Ryan, and today we've got someone that is no stranger to discussion videos on our channel. Gary is back and here to discuss a very hot topic that we see with every set release. It is the ban discussion. Gary, thank you so much for joining us again today. Are you excited to kind of go over some of your ideas on what you think as being a judge and seeing more competitive play than probably some of us out there to kind of show your expertise and your thoughts on what you think should be coming through?
Yeah, I think ban errata lists, they're a really tricky topic to touch on, and whenever they're doing them, they have to be really careful.
Mhm.
To be honest, I think where we're at with the meta currently, it's at a pretty healthy level, and I'll
Mm.
just go through a few of these cards quickly and touch on what I think needs a few small tweaks, because I
Mhm.
think overall the main thing that or Bandai probably want to look at is making sure that the new sets are
Mm.
playable and people want to play them, and we don't see the same sort of cards coming back over and over again and people throwing them in the same deck. So the
Mhm.
first one I've got up is Riburan for an errata. So I think we all know Cell Surge it's a strong deck. It's not unbeatable, but hand destruction is pretty oppressive. I don't feel like Riburan needs a ban in any way, shape, or form, or a limit. But what I do feel is just to try and take that extra pressure of hand destruction that Cell Surge has away, and errata to a mono green leader only. I think a lot of the community would agree if it's locked to a mono color leader or monocolor energy, then it will definitely help
Mm.
balance out that hand destruction there. The second errata on the list is something that we see often in Gogeta Zeno. So the ability to sort of get out Smoke Dragon as a unison. Smoke Dragon was not a unison that was designed for Gogeta Zeno at all, and it's obviously being used as a lot of draw power to keep the engine going. What I think they need to do, they've already errated this card once for
Mm.
the active main to leader lock it to a black demon clan. I think they need to do the same by putting the actual requirement as a cost on the -1 and doing that same black demon realm race. And I think that will just help keep the card in check. And it can still be utilized in the deck that it requires without
Mhm.
having to do anything where it's going to ban. It's not a really oppressive card, but I think it's a tool where Gogeta Xeno needs to be kept in check so that other decks can flourish
Mhm.
and needs a little bit of attention. For the ban, a little bit of a left field one, which it may or may not get a hit. Is Goku True Fighting Spirit. Now, its auto is the thing that sort of comes into question there. The ability of being able to punish an opponent whenever they activate a counter as a
Mm.
one cost. It's pretty oppressive in what it can do, but again, not a broken card. Uh, but with the new set coming out, there is a new one drop Goku Xeno coming out that is a more generic. When you play this card, draw one, same power level.
Mhm.
I feel like with that coming out, they probably want to look at removing this card from the meta and maybe help balance again Gogeta Xeno and just keep that in check a little bit. I don't
Mhm.
think, again, Gogeta's overly broken, but it definitely needs a few cards kept in check.
Mhm.
Another ban, and I think a lot of people will be happy if they see this in the ban list,
Mhm.
is Fu Shrouded in Mystery. Very, very powerful card created many sets ago, but when you're looking at those yellow decks that really stall and they're getting to that turn 6, tapping this and essentially shutting down everything if you don't have a response for it, and it's very hard to respond to, you pretty much it's game over because it shuts your next
Mhm.
turn down on top of the current turn. And when you're looking at blue ramp, yellow control, those decks are really abusing these. They only need one of. It's a essentially a secret rare, and I think
Mm.
it's just a little bit too strong for any of the meta.
And I guess bringing on like some of the mentions here, I just want to ask you a quick couple of questions in regards to your choices. Obviously, Fu is a 10 cost, so it's very, very hard to hit on play itself, which obviously we've seen a lot of counterplays. Even Trunks hits up to 7. There's no protection on this card. There's no barrier. There's no deflect. So it will be able to be hit by counterplays. But again, there's not many counterplays out there that will actually touch this card. So the fact that it's a 10 cost, and they can't really, I wouldn't imagine they would errata it to kind of cost less anyway. But it's obviously one of those cards that is so hard to interact with. It's very understandable why you would put that on your list. And True Fighting Spirit mentioning that there's a new Goku that is a 5k Xeno that will kind of work with the Union Fusion ability of a lot of black decks these days. There is actually another one that is a Goku that has 5k power as well. It's the counter attack, play this card. So there already is other options for that, which I can understand why it is a possibility that True Fighting Spirit may kind of make its way across, because there is other options that are allowing the Union Fusion to not be kind of DOA when you're playing these decks as well. So I kind of see where you're coming from, and it does obviously make sense in this shape itself, which will be interesting to see, obviously, how this does pan out, with your guesses there as well, Gary. And Ryan, obviously on your side, a couple of different cards that Gary didn't mention. And guys, I do want to mention as well, on the last slide itself, I didn't put any cards down for my own guesses because I felt like they were very similar between ourselves. So I wanted to make kind of like a communal prediction in terms of where we all think that some card needs to be hit in some way, shape, or form to discuss it through there. But these are the standouts that I guess individually we had ideas of that we wanted to kind of bring up and see if there is any sort of potential to kind of get these cards hit in some form. So Ryan, do you want to take us through you've got two bands here and a limit one, which Gary, you didn't have a limit at all. You had a couple of erratas instead. But Ryan, take us through your thought process on these cards.
Yeah, similar to how Gary mentioned with Fu Shrouded, which I was expecting to get banned last set. Alongside of that, I was expecting Turning the Tide to get hit. We saw SS4 kind of reign supreme for a while, and this card was, dominating
MVP
for quite a bit. And it's not that relevant right now, but it's always got that potential with blue whenever it comes back that this card can just become a big problem again. There's only one card in the game that can really answer this card, and that's kind of my main problem with it. If there's more answers to deal with it, then I wouldn't have an issue with it. But the fact that this card, when, used in these really oppressive stall decks, can just flat out win you the game with no kind of interaction or skill required, is kind of, my issue with it. The reason I think that it will get banned, though, is because they're going to keep introducing ramp strategies. And similar to how we saw with Kale, they're putting these restrictions on you can only play battle cards, with 25 to 30k power and things like that. I think eventually they'll just get sick of having to limit these cards and this archetype around this card, because if your ramp strategy is too good, then this card just becomes oppressive. So rather than move away from ramp, they'll probably just remove this card and kind of free up that archetype, which is kind of where I went with Turning the Tide. Similar to how Gary mentioned with the black smoke being abused, I feel like Kai is probably more the problem than what the black smoke is, only because we can see this kind of abuse not only the black smoke but also the mirror, and I guess the Pycon was the unison for the deck. So not so much getting abused, but having those options kind of available rather than punishing the unison black smoke and not having it available for any other deck. I think Kai is kind of more the problem, if anything. So I expected that to get banned. We saw Thwarting get reprinted, some of the 30k promos and things like that. Koitsukai's been reprinted, and this card's pretty expensive as well. So I was kind of surprised that it did get left out. I would have thought that this card would make its way into a reprint at some point as well, and it may in the future, but at this point I kind of think that it's probably coming up on the ban. And then for my limit one, I've got Koitsukai, which we have seen get reprinted. The reason that I've put this as a limit one is because we've got the new U7 deck coming out, which can quite easily get cards into the drop area. And just from watching people play on Untap and things like that, and in my own play, people are running 3 copies, 2 or 3 copies of this card just because it's so easy to get into the drop area, and essentially locking your opponent out of counterplays, because all of our counterplays at this point in the game are battle cards, and you just get punished too hard for this card. We've seen they're happy to put limit 1s on these cards. We saw it with Bergamo, New Ruler. So I kind of expect that this card will probably follow suit and get hit with a limit 1.
So touching on, obviously, now that we've got the new unison skill Empower, right? It's kind of crazy to think that, you'd be able to play Kai, well, you'd be able to use Kai's effect for free, play a unison with, 1 marker on it, a black unison with 1 marker, tick it up, +1, which most unisons already do have on them that you can play from that as well. Obviously, you've got the mirror, and then you've also got the Pycon there as well. And then Empower for a black unison card to get +2 markers, plus whatever you decide to kind of use energy to bring that new unison out. I mean, we're talking about 3 to 5 markers on a brand new unison for a possibility of 1 to 3 energy, which in a sense does absolutely make sense in terms of this card somehow seeing a touch. I mean, even now looking at it myself, I would not be surprised if it goes to limit 1. I think it recycles itself back into the deck at the end of the day, so it's never going to be dead once you've used it. It's going to go back in. So I can definitely see where you're coming from on there. And a question for both of you, now that we kind of bring this strategy up, right? You both had cards that were, I wouldn't say uninteractable, but very, very hard to interact with. We've got Turning the Tide, and we've also got Fu Shrouded in Mystery. If they said to you, and I say they as in Bandai said to the community, we are going to make counterplays that, don't have, like, let's say, I mean, I guess it's kind of crazy to say, but, like, they can hit cards up to, 8 energy cost, 9 energy cost, 10 energy cost or so, or some of them that, do get through deflect, but they're very expensive to kind of play. Like, let's say it's an SCR, or even Turning the Tide, it still costs 7 at the end of the day. It does have deflect, but a counterplay that might have no energy limitation, but you have to use 3 or 4 energy to kind of stop that from being played. Would you guys be for or against it?
Personally, I'll be against. I think I'll rather than balance the meta overall and not have to rely on something like a secret rare counterplay or such a high cost counterplay, because it really, like, as much as it will change the way you play the game, like, to have to tap that much energy just to counterplay something, it would only really work for like a blue deck, a yellow deck, and then your other strategies are going to suffer against those sort of things as well. I'll much rather them have counterplays. Like, it's really hard to balance. You want to be able to respond, but at the same time, you don't want to have a game where you can't play anything because your opponent just shuts down everything that you're doing. I saw a deck at locals just the other week where it was literally whatever you played, it was responded against, and you almost couldn't play the game. The only way to finish the game was decking out, because there was that many responses in the game now to almost everything. And there are a few cards where you can't respond now, just depending on their criteria. But I'll rather see a more interactive gameplay than have a full counterplay game.
Ryan?
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Absolutely. Especially with Fu Shrouded, we have a lot of counterplays in the game that can almost answer this card, but once Fu hits the field, all of your on-play autos don't get to activate and things like that. So that's kind of where it puts it over the top, in my opinion. The fact that you can only interact with this card before it hits the field. Otherwise, you're just kind of left stranded. So I would definitely be against having that kind of high energy answer to the card. I think we don't want to get into a position where we're building the game around a specific card which is really strong. It's probably best to just eliminate that card and let them build the archetypes that they want to build, and allow people to play the way they want to play, rather than just anticipating a big bomb coming down that's just going to end the game.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's why we do these discussion videos, right? We all have obviously different thought processes, and it's kind of interesting to hear, if there was potential to kind of add something in or remove something in. And this is exactly what the ban predictions are every couple of months when they do release new cards, and people try to find broken ways to kind of incorporate that into old decks or new decks, and some things that are not meant to be incorporated, and some things that are kind of cheesed out or kind of tinkered with. That's obviously the reason why they introduce these things. So yeah, definitely good to hear obviously your guys' thoughts on what you think going forward, if that is a possibility for them to kind of bring in, or if they should just kind of try to, I guess, eliminate the need to kind of release these cards by tinkering with the old cards that are uninteractable in a sense, that have already been released. For our last slide, like I mentioned, nothing specifically that I wanted to bring up for myself. I think you guys done a pretty good job in terms of, going over some of the key cards that we're seeing. Obviously, we finished up with Worlds and we did see a good representation of different colored decks. So we kind of got to see how those decks played out and what cards were kind of like the MVPs, what should be looked at and what kind of should be left alone, which has obviously brought out a fantastic discussion for, I guess, people to kind of go over and figure out where the meta might head going forward with set releases. The three cards that I want to kind of bring up and talk about now and, give my input with as well. We all generally agreed with the Piccolo Jr. Rada. We all said that the auto not being once per turn was kind of crazy. A unison that costs 2, very, very easy to get out in a red deck as well. The availability to obviously draw a card, +1 marker. But again, we're kind of looking at, there's a counter for everything these days. There's a counter play, there's a counter attack. This is generically any counter skill that gets activated. You can choose one of your opponent's battle cards with 15k power or less and KO it. So that can be activated 3 times in a turn if you wanted to, and that gets rid of 3 bodies on the board. Kind of insane that this card... I would say that this card kind of lasted this long without kind of being looked at. We're obviously going to see a very, very strong representation from red in the next set as well. I'd be genuinely surprised if this card didn't get touched in some way, even if it isn't that auto specifically. But yeah, like I mentioned, it's very, very easy to get out. We see a lot of red. We see almost every red deck playing this red unison these days, honestly, and obviously some of them incorporating the Jiren from the expansions as well that kind of get played. But it seems like Piccolo Jr. is the most represented red unison that is in the game right now.
I think because red isn't really doing too much at the top tables, it's kind of gotten
Flown
away
under
with
the
it.
radar. Yeah.
But then at the same time, you don't want to leave it unchecked for when a red deck does make it all the way up there.
Yeah. And obviously mentioning that as well, Gary, great point. They kind of errated Planet Vampire when Red Broly wasn't really, seen as often as it was back in the day, but they kind of knew that, if Red continued to get support and, these best of ones continue to happen, they need to make sure that this deck doesn't kind of like spiral out of control. So I would be very interesting that you've brought that point up that, red decks aren't very represented out there at the moment. If they do decide to kind of touch into this color and still do something about this unison. Higher Dragon, Sun Gohan leader. You two have very, I wouldn't say very different, but you have different approaches to how to balance this leader. Ryan, do you want to explain to us how you think they should tackle this leader head on?
Yeah, I guess my kind of thoughts for this deck, and I would be surprised if it doesn't get touched in any kind of way. They've already mentioned in their directs that they do keep a track of which decks are performing really well and potentially overperforming. Just the ability to draw either player's turn just by comboing the High Dragon is probably just a bit too much, especially when you have access to it so easily with the other activate main. So my prediction for the errata was potentially it being on either your opponent's turn or on your turn. That when you kind of combo with the dragon, you get that draw 1, so not on both. Just to kind of limit it a bit. I would probably expect it to be, on your opponent's turn, keep it defensive rather than having the ability to continuously swing 20k and maintain your hand size, or at least +1 actually, because you're getting the skillers from the drop area as well. So that's my kind of prediction that, it's errata to activate battle, but if it's your opponent's turn.
Gary?
Yeah. What about you, Gary? What was your thoughts for the errata?
I think that's a really interesting take because that gives the opponent a chance to, if they want to do something, to try and remove it before you can combo it off and interact with it that little bit. My thought was, and I've had not just myself discussions with a whole bunch of other people regarding this, because it does see a lot of exposure being the dominant yellow deck at the moment. I was thinking more the active main to, if you when you activate it, draw one card, and then you can play a monster card with an energy cost of 1, obviously skillless from the drop, but then adding, if you do, then discard a card. Because I feel like the problem with this leader is the draw power, not as such the power of the leader itself, but the amount that it draws. So it's just trying to keep that in check a little bit. So if you do play something and you have that potential to do another draw, then you have to sacrifice something by discarding one from hand. It just keeps that hand size in check that little bit more. I would hate to see this leader go altogether, and I don't think they will do that. But if they don't do something, this leader has the potential to see a ban down the track or a really heavily errata.
And it would be unfortunate to see this card get banned. We saw Mecha Freezer get banned because of how strong it was. And sometimes I do think that erratas can work on these leaders. And we saw King Vegeta get errated into oblivion, and the deck just never got played again. So I do think that it's good to errata leaders if they're overpowered and kind of bring them back to scale, not necessarily just ban them straight out.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, right? We've only had one emergency ban before where, it felt like that they missed the mark and they were like, you know what, we actually do need to kind of extend on this and we need to kind of push this forward. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they kind of do completely get rid of it, or they feel like an errata is enough. And as long as the errata is good enough to kind of, I guess, warrant the leader still being around, which I agree. I think the leader should definitely still be around, but it does need to be touched in some way. It'll be interesting to see, because I don't believe that they want to go down that emergency ban list again. They want to kind of, get it right, because if they don't go down that emergency ban list route and they don't get it right the first time, this leader's going to be unchecked for the next 4 to 5 months, which is a very, very long time in terms of how many events that we're going to have in that time. We're going to have obviously locals every week. We're probably going to have a couple of regionals coming through. I know the states have already announced that they've got a couple of regionals, coming this month itself. So to get it wrong and this leader to still be around with the same amount of presence that it currently has, I kind of feel like it's going to be a no-brainer on that side, that it definitely should in some way, shape or form be hit. And the last card that I want to bring up, I think everyone kind of has the same idea. Or when I say idea, we all think that this card needs to be hit in some form, right? We've obviously spoken about this offline together, but we actually have separate ideas on what we think should happen to this. So, Gary, we've had the discussion where we think they should limit it to 1. Just a straight limit to 1. There is ways to bring this card back if it is ever sent to your warp. And obviously if it is in your drop, you can overwhelm it and then bring it back anyway. So there is ways to recycle this, even if it is played and then it's kind of KO'd or it is warped from the field. Unless it's removed from the game, there's no other way to kind of get another one on the field. But Ryan, you had the idea that they need to errata this battle card. Explain to us what your process is for thinking that and what the errata is.
Yeah, starting off with the errata, my idea was putting an energy restriction on it. So similar to how we saw with some of the other Gogeta Xeno cards, I believe like the SR, it involves either you or your opponent having 2 energy. I was thinking something along the lines for this card as well. Whether that's 2 or 3 energy, I'm not too sure, but I do think that being able to play this turn 1, especially you going first, is just ridiculous. I don't think the issue is having multiple copies of the card, because it does have that unique tag on it. I think it's how early that you can play this card is what makes it incredibly strong. If you're playing this on turn 3, it's not as oppressive as what we're seeing right now, and there are answers to this card as well for majority of the colors. The problem is you just don't have access to them as early as you can play this card, and I think that's what puts it over the top. So I would like to see this. Yeah, if you have 3 energy, then you can do the Union Fusion, or the Overwhelm, or both. But that's kind of my idea for the errata.
I think the errata is a good idea. I think one thing we can all agree on is seeing this card come down on turn 1 feels bad. And probably something needs to happen to it. How they end up checking that, whether they limit errata or do something else, I will have to wait and see. I think the errata is a really good idea. I think limiting to reduce the chance of it being in your opponent's hand or your hand turn 1, I think either way could work. The reality is, with a lot of these sort of decisions and cards that we look at, I don't think anyone ever wants to see a card banned, and I don't think Bandai's intent is ever to ban cards. They want to try and keep the card pool. We know there's no rotation, there's no plan for rotation in this game, and it's about trying to balance what we have without removing cards and making decks unplayable, which is why you don't want to see cards like Icarus as a leader completely removed from the game. You want to see it balanced, kept in check, so that anyone who really wants to play the monster package and play the leader for what it is, they can have fun with that package still. And all those other cards, like no one wants to see Gogeta Xena go, but I think we want to see it kept in check that little bit, so that when new sets drop, we can enjoy playing the new set without seeing the same triangle coming up over and over again.
Yeah, and that obviously gives way for new support and new archetypes to kind of make their debut and make people want to actually dive into them and be like, oh, this is actually good, rather than I can't add anything into my old Gogeta Xeno deck, so this set has nothing for me. So yeah, definitely great points on pretty much all the cards there. I'm very, very excited to see what actually happens with this, and I'm sure it's not going to be too long away from when Bandai actually do release any information about that. We've pretty much got set 16 reveals wrapping up in the next couple of weeks itself. So I will be very, very keen to kind of watch this back and see how close or how far away we were with our discussions. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. Hope you liked the discussion. Leave a comment below what you think your bans, erratas, and limitations will be in the next set drop, if it hasn't already dropped by the time you watch this video. Leave a thumbs up on the video if you do enjoy it. It helps us know to kind of continue to make these discussion videos, and check out our Facebook page, Double Sleeve content, for everything else related. Gary, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure having you on discussions, and take care.